Hello, and welcome to our fourth session entitled Assessment and Feedback in the Virtual World. My name's Heather Hilz-Fitzgerald, and I'm happy to be here to guide us through our assessment focus session. So sometimes assessment can be daunting for us as educators. Many times our pacing of the entire school year is based on assessments needed at the end of the unit, at the end of the quarter trimester, just to complete the year. And so much of our instructional practice revolves around assessment. And although that, again, can be a lackluster way to think about education, assessment is deeply necessary to support our students. And so when we assess, we can make changes. When we assess, we can help out our students based on their needs. And when we assess, we can allow for students to even learn about themselves. When I was in the classroom, I never engaged with the students that the assessment was a bad thing. I always wanted them to see it as a moment in time of their learning, to see where they were. And from there, I could support them in whichever way they needed to eventually get to that success. When we look at John Hattie's visible learning data, you can see assessment intertwined within the influences. So if we're noticing about self-reported grades, how big of an impact that has for students to be able to reflect on their own progress and success, even teachers being able to gauge the estimate of achievement on future assessments. The opportunity for us to create intervention like instruction for our students based on assessments, employing those self-efficacy skills where students are really monitoring their work habits and tracking their success. And then ultimately, we as educators coming together as a team to plan and predict based off of formative and summative assessments. Seeing that assessment is extremely vital, it then now is a transition for many of us to have to move from ways that we possibly were assessing before into a virtual world. So now that this transition has been made in our educational world, we see that the previous state of assessment may need to be reworked, revisited, or revamped. With paper-based and online learning programs as our go-to for assessments when we were in the classroom, and a lot of times based on students' rote memorization or just the basic concepts and procedures, we see that these assessments are needed to make sure we're on the right track. But how are we going to now manage these if we're not in that face-to-face type of setting? And what type of feedback are we going to be able to provide for our students? And will our students find these assessments or that feedback valuable? So if we're approaching the hybrid and online learning model, we can look at diving into assessments in more of a production-like, presentation-like format. So instead of the timed multiplication test or possibly, our go-to Kahoots, how can we develop assessments that are pieces or items that are meaningful enough to curate, are meaningful for students to continue to develop over time, to design in a specific manner that is meaningful to who they are as a learner, and ultimately be able to then share those products of learning for not only themselves, but their teachers and others. So when we're talking about assessment, we see that there are ultimately three types of assessment that we're constantly using as educators. The first one is the observational type of assessment, where we're constantly gauging, monitoring, just in real time what our students are doing and producing. We have our formative assessment that will allow us to understand how well instruction is going and what changes we may need to do and or what small groups may we need to begin pooling in order to reteach or enrich based on results. And then we have our summative assessment, which really then allows for our students to have the final approach of a unit and to show what standards they have completely mastered. So with the face-to-face setting, a lot of these obvious types of assessments were easy to employ because we had so much control over the time, the space, and so now we don't have that luxury. So we're going to have to start thinking outside of the box, or we're even going to just have to shift our thinking and reach for other means to use these same types of assessments in an online setting. And ultimately, we will then see that they do come to the same result as if we were in face-to-face. So the first area that I'm going to focus on just as tips and tricks for how we're going to assess based on each of the different types of assessments. So language arts is our go-to at this point. An idea for your observational type of assessment is to use kind of those parent connection apps. This here, we're talking about Class Dojo. I have had many teachers tell me about how you can have students showcase their learning by either adding photos and videos to their own portfolios. I also know that Seesaw is another great example of that as well. For formative assessment, I found a really great online tool called Coggle. So you're not really doing just a multiple choice type of test. You're actually allowing for the student to share maps and flowcharts of ideas connected to a specific topic that you've been teaching on. And it also could be a collaborative tool. And then finally, your summative, really thinking about that high-end performance task that allows for multi-step opportunities to include multi-standards within that actual task. And so I'll go ahead and just jump into this one really quick just so it's like a visual. This would be an example of something that could be created for students. This one specifically would be probably for like a 4th or 5th grade classroom, and it's part of a larger unit based on a station rotation model. So in this example, we notice that the performance task is going to allow for students to have kind of that grand learning experience and more of a connection to a real world application. So giving students multiple steps to participate in creating a conservation report that would include not only reading, but then going ahead and crafting out a structured graphic organizer that would reflect something similar to a informational report. So those are ideas for your ELA assessments. For math, one of the observational ideas is using the application EduCreations, which we actually have access to within our Clever platform. It's ultimately a way for you as an educator to create interactive whiteboard lessons, but this is also a great opportunity for students to record their learning on the whiteboard and show how they may process a problem or the strategy that they may have to solve something. One of my favorite types of tools for assessing on a formative basis was GoFormative. They do have a free version. I did purchase the upgraded version just because of the amount of assessments that I would utilize. But what is great is that the assessment allowed me to view student choices and their responses in real time. And even at times, I could go ahead and intervene right then and there with the child if we needed to do some reteaching quickly. The other idea for your summative for your math would be definitely looking into a project-based learning like experience. And so being able to build, design, create ultimately in that manner is something that's very meaningful, and students just love to create things. So this was an activity that they would also need to participate in, which obviously incorporated mathematics, but allowed them to be unique in the way that they would draw kind of this map-like scenario. Now, when we get into other subject areas, such as our history and science, again, falling towards that idea or that approach of making those true ELA connections is going to be something that's very, it's just going to be something that will allow you to incorporate all of those subject areas in a meaningful and in a natural way. So a lot of times thinking about your core themes when it comes to history, and then connecting it to possibly what type of reading is taking place in the classroom or reading strategy, and or also connecting that to what type of writing is also taking place. This was an activity given to students within a fifth grade classroom. And so even thinking about giving your students the opportunity to collaborate on a project is also something that seems to be a little bit more relevant and or engaging for your students. So in this, they would be able to collectively come together, learn about some different trials and or situations that took place during the colonial period, and then they were going to go ahead and script it out. And obviously we can't see that because my computer is lagging once again. Okay, so now we are able to go ahead and see this specific activity. Again, just incorporating multitude of standards from different subject areas, and then actually having students work within a group to contribute to a larger type of project definitely will give you more engagement, and also just that factor of critical thinking, communication, and collaboration. Again, looking at our science and integrating that within the other subject areas, but it's easy to see that you can constantly use language arts to help support the concepts that you're producing and or sharing with your students within scientific standards, and also obviously your math connection, really transforming those equations or your word problems to make connections to what you're currently studying in science as well. And I do agree in the fact that when we think about project-based learning, maker spaces, and design thinking, you really are able to establish those types of scientific processes for your students that are highly engaging. And of course, we're going to talk about Google. So Google obviously has a plethora of options to support assessment. I recently was part of a Google training that talked about how all of just our basic Google applications can be transformed in a way that is an assessment. And so if you notice, all of these different icons give you just a snippet of the ideas that we all shared as Google trainers as to how we would utilize Google tools as a means of assessment. And I really liked this image here of what they showed, because it's not necessarily just a one way to look at how a student is producing something or solving something, but we really need to look at the triangulation of evidence, where we're also taking consideration what the student is saying, what they are doing, and what they are creating. And so if you review some of these as ideas to use in your own classroom, you'll find that they're very authentic and very and very streamlined usage, so students don't have a hard time accessing them as well. Based off of our idea of universal design learning and really honing into students and their needs as individuals, possibilities for voice and choice as well are great instances for having that authentic assessment. So if you notice here, I have an example. This is from Design Thinking by Lindsay Portnoy, and she has provided different options as to what do I want the students to show me, and then allowing them to select from those menus as to what they want to show as well as what they had learned. So these are just some pre-generated ideas that you could go ahead and morph into any type of assessment that you need. These are also hyperlinked ideas for either choice boards, choice menus, tic-tac-toe menus as well. Another great tool that I had previously talked about in another session is using those portfolios. And I really fall upon the work by Sunny Magana, and he is somebody who wrote about T3 framework, and it's really transitioning us from that SAMR model to kind of now taking what we are creating based off of technological use and creating these types of digital living portfolios to house large projects that students are working on, ongoing projects that students are going on. And so not only are they able to house those things that they learned about themselves at the beginning of the year, but they're also being able to house those meaningful projects and then have a way to reflect and look at them as the year goes on. And kind of wrapping it up as well, it's always good to go ahead and include your reflection for your students in a sense of a self-reflection and a self-assessment, and could even be used as a peer assessment. So this is a specific feedback for growth chart given by Lindsay Portnoy as well from the Design Thinking book. And it allows for students to go ahead and view what are things that they did well during the time of learning and areas that they think that they could grow in. And this could even be pushed out as a peer answering for a peer, or again, just a student self-assessing themselves. And this is actually going to be the activity that is going to take place for your final not your final activity, we're almost there, but for your fourth assignment. Again, thank you for being a part of this. I hope that you were able to come away with some really great assessment tools for the future of your virtual learning experience. I also am giving 2 different suggestions up here at the top as furthering your education, whether that's through Leading Edge, which is a great way to enhance your knowledge and your tool belt of ways to instruct students online. And then also this one down below, I believe has free webinar sessions based on how to best assess in an online platform. So going back to Google Classroom here, you're in session 4 right now. And then you're going to go ahead and access the assignment for session 4, and following that self-assessment, you'll access this document, and in it you will have different prompts that will allow for you to reflect on what are things that you are doing well when it comes to assessing your students, and what things might you do differently or enhance for your students, especially as you transition into that online setting. And then again, think about this graphic organizer here as a perfect tool for you to use with your students as we begin to get back into class. Again, thank you, and I'll see you later.